At my son's promotion celebration at the mountain lodge, he walked up carrying a folder and dropped it in front of me. "Sign it," he said. I opened it and froze. It was a document cutting all legal and family ties between us. I looked up and asked, "Is this really what you want?" He pointed at the signature line and shouted in front of 80 guests, "Sign it! You've been nothing but a parasite my whole life." The ballroom fell completely silent as every eye turned towards us. "Before we go any further, thank you for being here. It genuinely means something. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your country. I want to know who is in this room with me." And one quick note. This story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling purposes. Names and places are coincidental. The lesson, however, is one worth keeping. The snow had been falling since 3 in the morning. I knew because I had been awake since 2:30, lying in the dark, listening to it tick against the bedroom window the way it does when the flakes are still small, and the real weight has not come yet. By the time I pulled on my work pants and laced up my boots in the kitchen, the porch light showed a clean 4 inches on the steps, and more coming down steady out of the black Colorado sky. I am Cormac Strand. I am 68 years old. And on the morning of November 14th, 2024, I drove my 2007 Ford pickup through the empty streets of Telluride, with a cup of coffee going cold in the cup holder, and a shovel in the truck bed that had belonged to my father before it belonged to me. Most mornings, I do not think about what I am driving toward. I just drive. Coldwater Ridge Lodge sits at the base of the San Juan Mountains, and in the dark, before dawn, it looks the way it always has. To me, not like a destination, but like something that grew up out of the rock and the snow on its own. Slow and certain, the way things do in this part of Colorado. 400 acres, 42 guest cabins, a main lodge with 14 rooms, 2 restaurants, and a ballroom that holds 200 people when we move the furniture. My father picked this land when nobody wanted it. I built what stands on it now. The parking lot was empty when I pulled in. I cut the engine, pulled my gloves on, and climbed out into air so cold it went straight through my jacket and pressed flat against my chest. "Morning, Cormac." Frank Odell was already there. He was always already there. 22 years the man had been showing up before sunrise, and in all that time I had never once beaten him to the lot. "Frank," I said. He fell into step beside me, his own shovel over his shoulder. He was 55, and built like a man who had spent his whole life outdoors, which he had. We walked toward the main entrance without saying anything else, and that was fine. Frank and I had long ago run out of need to fill the quiet. We worked the front walk first, then the path to the east cabins, then back around to clear the drainage channel along the north face before it backed up and made ice. The work had a rhythm I knew in my hands better than I knew most things. Push and lift and step. My father taught me the right way to throw snow when I was 12 years old. You do not push it straight ahead. You lead it to the side, redirect it, work with the weight instead of against it. I still hear his voice when I do it. I still do it his way. At 6:50, a black SUV swung into the far end of the lot. New tires, clean panels, not a scratch on it. I watched it park, watched the door open, watched my son step out in a long wool coat, a leather messenger bag over one shoulder, moving toward the main entrance the way a man moves when he owns a place. Derek did not look in my direction. He had not looked in my direction in longer than I wanted to count. "Shot that the new general manager, Keon," Frank said. His voice was flat and careful. "That's my son," I said. Frank did not answer. He pushed a shovel of snow off the path and watched it fall into the drift along the fence line. "Big party tonight," he said finally. His promotion celebration. I turned back to the drainage channel. 80 guests? Full dinner service? Frank made a sound in the back of his throat that was not quite a word. You going? He asked. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the cardstock envelope I had found in my mailbox the evening before. Cream-colored, gold-embossed lettering. I turned it over so Frank could see the line below my name. Cormac Strand Maintenance Staff. Frank read it. A muscle moved in his jaw. I'll be there, I said. I put the card back in my pocket. Go ahead and make sure the sound system in the ballroom is tested before 5. Full check. And tell whoever is running the board tonight, do not turn off the recording function. Not for any reason. Frank looked at me for a moment, with the particular expression he had used on me, maybe a dozen times in 22 years. The one that meant he understood more than I had said, and was choosing not to ask the rest. All right, he said. We finished the North Channel and moved on to the guest cabin loop. The sky was turning gray at the edges over the mountains, the kind of gray that means the sun is trying. My coffee was long past cold in the truck. My shoulders ached the way they always ached now in the deep cold, an old familiar ache I had stopped complaining about to anyone. I had built every foot of what stood around me. Tonight, someone was going to try to take it. The envelope had been sitting in my coat pocket for 16 hours by the time I got home that evening, and I still had not decided what to do about the party. I hung my coat on the hook by the door, pulled my boots off. Vera was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold. The same way my coffee had gone cold that morning, untouched, forgotten the way drinks go when your mind is somewhere else entirely. She looked up when I came in, and her eyes went straight to my coat pocket, the way a woman's eyes go when she already knows what is in there. They sent you a card, she said. It was not a question. Maintenance staff, I said. Vera set her cup down with a small, careful click and pressed her lips together. Her hands, both of them flat on the table, went very still. After 39 years, I knew what that stillness meant. It meant she was deciding between 3 or 4 things she could say, and choosing none of them yet. Sit down, Cormac, she said. I sat. The kitchen was warm and smelled like the pine cleaner she used on the floors, and something else underneath it, the particular smell of our house in winter wood and heat, and the faint ghost of every meal cooked in this room since 1986. I had built this house the year after we married. Framed it myself over 2 summers working weekends when the resort work allowed. My father had helped me pour the foundation. Tell me about August, Vera said. I looked at her. You know about August. I know what you've told me over 39 years, she said, which is not the same thing. Tonight I want the whole story. From the beginning. Because tomorrow you are going to walk into that ballroom, and I need to understand exactly what you are walking into. Her eyes were steady on mine. Brown darker at the center, the same eyes that had looked at me across a diner booth in the spring of 1985 when she was 22 and I was 28, and neither of us had any idea what the next 4 decades were going to require of us. I put my hands around hers on the table. All right, I said. From the beginning, my father, August Strand, came to Telluride in the winter of 1973 with $400 a used pickup and no particular reason to stop, except that the truck needed a new alternator and the mechanic on Main Street was the first honest face he had seen in 3 states. He got a room at the boarding house on Colorado Avenue. He got a job clearing snow for the county road crew. He got up every morning at 4:30 and worked until the light was gone. In the spring of '74, he walked the land above the ridgeline land nobody wanted because it faced the wrong direction for ski runs and sat too far from the main road for easy access. He looked at it for a long time. Then he bought it. How much? Vera asked. $4,200, I said. He borrowed the last $800 from the mechanic. Paid it back in 2 months. I was born 4 years later. I grew up understanding that our family had land the way other families have a name, not because anyone had handed it to us, but because my father had looked at something nobody else wanted and understood what it could become. He put a shovel in my hands when I was 7. When I was 16, he took me up to the ridge on a January morning, the ground frozen solid under a foot of new snow, and he swept his arm across the whole of it, the raw land, the bare tree line, the distant peaks going white against a sky so blue, it made your eyes hurt. "What do you see?" he said. I squinted at it. "Nothing much." "That's right." He nodded slowly, like I had said something smart instead of something obvious. "Anybody drives past this road, they look up here, they see nothing. That is exactly why we are safe. The day this place looks like something, that is the day people start making calculations about it." You understand? I did not understand. Not then. "I understand now," I told Vera. She squeezed my hands. "Keep going." August died in the spring of 2003. He was 71 years old, and he went the way he had always said he wanted to go, which was working. He had a heart attack on a Tuesday morning while he was walking the east perimeter of the property, checking the drainage the way he checked it every spring. They found him sitting against a pine tree with his hands in his lap, his face turned toward the mountains. He left me the land, the lodge, which by then had 12 cabins and 40 employees, and the operating company, which I had quietly incorporated 6 years earlier under the name Strand Mountain Holdings. He left the incorporation documents with Hollis Vane, who had been handling our legal affairs since 1991. He left a letter for Hollis with very specific instructions about the probate process, which was completed in 2004 without a single challenge, because there was no one to challenge it. And he left one other thing. He left Vera an envelope sealed her name in his handwriting on the front. He did not explain it. He had told me only, "Give it to her when I'm gone. She'll know when to open it." "I still have it," Vera said. I looked at her. "I never opened it," she said. Her voice dropped half a register the way it did when something cost her. 21 years, Cormac. It's in the drawer by the bed. I look at it sometimes. I always thought you would tell the children first. I thought I would open it after that. After you finally told them." The words landed in the kitchen between us with a weight that had been building for a long time. I looked at my wife's hands under mine, the fine lines across her knuckles, the way her left thumb pressed against my palm. "I know," I said. "Tomorrow," she said. It was not a threat. It was not an accusation. It was just the word that meant we had run out of road. Outside the kitchen window, the snow had started again, soft and steady, covering the driveway, covering the yard, covering everything my father had seen when he looked at a bare ridge in 1974 and understood what nobody else could see. I sat there in the warm kitchen with my wife's hands in mine and thought about what I had never said out loud to my son and how long a silence could grow before it stopped being protection and started being something else entirely. Vera went to bed at 11. I stayed at the kitchen table with my hands around an empty coffee cup and the particular kind of quiet that only comes when everyone else in the house is asleep and you are left alone with the things you have been postponing. I had been postponing this one for a long time. The first time I understood what money could do to a person, not to the person who had it, but to the person who found out about it. I was 32 years old and sitting in a bar on Colorado Avenue with a man named Russell Keene. Russell and I had grown up in Telluride together. Same school, same pickup football in the dirt lot behind the hardware store, Same bad judgment about certain things in our early 20s. He was the kind of friend that you trusted without thinking about it, the way you trust the road you have driven 1,000 times. I had never once questioned it. That evening, I told him the truth. August had been gone 3 years. The resort was running, growing, starting to become something real. I had a company worth more than anything either of us had imagined when we were throwing footballs in the dirt. I told him the numbers. I told him because he was my oldest friend and I was tired of carrying it alone. Cormac, he said, raising his glass. That is something else. 1 month later, Russell walked into my father's old study, which was my study by then, and sat across the desk from me with a folded piece of paper. I want to buy the north parcel, he said. I've got a developer from Durango interested. We split the profit. I stared at him. August already told me he'd consider it, Russell said. Before he passed. My father had been dead for 3 years. He had never said any such thing to anyone. I knew that the way I knew the drainage patterns on the east slope and the load weight of the main lodge roof. I knew it without having to think. I took the piece of paper, unfolded it, read the number he was offering for land that was worth 4 times as much. Then I folded it back up and pushed it across the desk. Get out of my office, Russell, I said, and don't come back. His face did something complicated. Then he stood up, took the paper, and walked out. I never spoke to him again. I sat in that study for a long time afterward. My chest felt hollowed out in a way that had nothing to do with the money and everything to do with the 32 years I had believed I knew who Russell Keene was. That evening I made myself a rule I have kept for 36 years. Nobody finds out what you have until you decide they need to know. Not friends, not neighbors, and God help me, not even family. Because the moment the number is in the air changes, and you can never get back what was there before. I told myself I was protecting my children from that change. You were protecting yourself, I said out loud to the empty kitchen. My own voice startled me. Admit it. I poured the cold coffee down the sink. I had made Vera a promise the winter Derek turned 25. We were sitting on the porch in the cold watching snow come down over the ridge, and I told her when Derek turns 30, I will sit him down and tell him everything. August's land, the company, the numbers, all of it. Vera had looked at me with those steady brown eyes and nodded once. Derek turned 30. I looked at my son across the Thanksgiving table and thought, not yet. He is still finding his footing. Next year, he turned 35. I watched him at Christmas talking on his phone in the driveway, laughing at something, and I thought he seems distracted. It will keep. He turned 38, and somewhere between 30 and 38, the window I had been waiting for had quietly closed, and I had not noticed until it was already gone. The one thing I had done was pay for his education. Derek was accepted to the MBA program at the University of Denver in 2009. He called me on a Friday evening, voice cracking with something between disbelief and joy. Dad, he said. Dad, I got in. Good, I said. I'm proud of you, son. I got off the phone, walked out the back door, stood in the yard in February cold with the mountains going dark above the tree line, and let the feeling come up through my chest until my eyes burned and my shoulders shook, and I cried in the dark where nobody could see me. The following Monday, I called Hollis Vane and asked him to transfer $140,000 directly to the University of Denver's bursar office, paid in full. No name attached on the student account, just a third-party payment, which the IRS allows without gift tax consequences when paid directly to an educational institution. Derek would see only that his balance was cleared. He would not see where it came from. He never asked. I told myself that was humility on his part. Standing in the kitchen at midnight the night before, everything I finally admitted what it actually was. It was a son who had learned not to look too closely at things his father did not explain, and I had taught him that. Every year I waited, I taught him a little more of it. The snow was still falling outside the window. Somewhere up the ridge, Coldwater Ridge Lodge was dark and quiet, waiting for tomorrow evening the way a stage waits before the curtain goes up. I rinsed my cup, turned off the light, and went upstairs to lie awake next to my sleeping wife and think about all the roads I had chosen not to take. The person who opened the door for Russell Keene was me. I had told myself for 36 years that I would never make that mistake again, never let the wrong person close enough to see the full picture. What I had not accounted for was the possibility that the door could be opened from the inside by someone I loved, who had no idea what he was letting in. Derek called on a Wednesday in October 4.5 years ago. His voice had a brightness in it I had not heard in a while. Dad, I want to bring someone home for Thanksgiving," he said. "Her name is Lacey. Her family is from Denver. I think you're going to like her." Vera looked at me from across the kitchen when I got off the phone. Her eyebrows went up a 1/4 inch. "He sounds like himself," she said. "The old version." "He does," I agreed. Thanksgiving that year was warm for November. The snow held off. The sky was the hard, bright blue that comes after a cold front moves through. Derek arrived Wednesday evening with Lacey Pruitt in the passenger seat of a rental car that was nicer than anything my son had ever driven on his own. Lacey was 32, blonde, with the particular kind of polish that comes not from beauty school, but from being raised in a household where presentation was considered a form of respect. She shook my hand with a firm grip, looked me straight in the eye, and said it was a pleasure to meet me. She had good manners. She was also, within the first 20 minutes, taking quiet inventory of my house. My eyes were watching her eyes, and her eyes were moving across the kitchen cabinets, the age of the appliances, the single-pane windows I had been meaning to replace since 2015. Vera noticed too. I could tell by the way she set down the dish towel a half-second too deliberately. Lacey's parents arrived Thursday morning. Her father, Garrett Pruitt, drove a Cadillac Escalade with Colorado plates and got out wearing a vest over a flannel shirt in the way men do when they want to appear casual and cannot quite pull it off. He was 60 at the time, broad-shouldered with silver hair, and the handshake of a man who had spent decades making sure his handshake communicated something. "Garrett Pruitt," he said, gripping my hand. "Great to finally meet you, Cormac. Derek talks about you." Something moved in his face when he said my name. Just a fraction, a slight settling like a man who has just confirmed something he was not entirely certain of. I filed it away without knowing why. Nadine Pruitt came around from the passenger side, warm smile, a casserole dish covered in foil, the kind of woman who arrives at someone else's house for the first time and immediately offers to help in the kitchen. Vera liked her right away. I could tell. Dinner was good. Derek was relaxed in a way he had not been around me in longer than I could remember, his shoulders down his laugh, real reaching across the table to pour Lacey's water without being asked. I watched my son and tried to hold on to that. Tried not to track the other things I was noticing. Garrett asked about the resort 3 times. Not bluntly, smoothly, the way a man does when he is making conversation and gathering information at the same time. "You've worked out at Coldwater Ridge a long time, Cormac, first time. Beautiful property up there. You know the ownership group at all, second time. Derek tells me you've been in maintenance operations out there for years. Must know every inch of the place. Third time." Each time I answered simply, "Yes, a long time. Not personally, no. I do know it well." Each time Garrett nodded and moved the conversation somewhere else. After dinner, Derek and Garrett took their coffee to the front porch. Nora, who had driven up from Durango for the holiday, came and stood next to me at the kitchen window. We watched the two of them through the glass. Garrett leaning against the porch railing, talking with his hands. Derek nodding along with his whole body the way young men do when they have found someone whose confidence feels like direction. "Dad," Nora said, keeping her voice low, "I don't like him." "Garrett, he asked me 3 questions about you tonight," she said. "Specifically about you. Not about the family. Just you." She wrapped both hands around her mug and her knuckles went white. It felt like a background check. I looked at my daughter. She had her mother's eyes and her grandfather's instincts, and in 33 years, she had not yet been wrong about a person in any way that mattered. "I'll keep an eye on it," I said. Nora made a sound that meant she had already moved past keeping an eye on it and was at the next stage. But she let it go. Later that night, after the Pruitts had gone to their hotel and Derek was asleep in his old room, Vera came and found me in the kitchen. She sat down across from me and folded her hands on the table. "Garrett Pruitt looked at this house," she said, "the way a man looks at something he is figuring out how to acquire." My chest tightened the way it does when you hear out loud the thing you have been thinking privately. "I know," I said. "He knows who you are, Cormac." Her voice was quiet and certain. "I don't know how, but he knows." I sat with that for a moment. Outside, the first snow of the season had started soft, tentative flakes that vanished the second they touched the warm ground. "I'll call Hollis tomorrow," I said. Vera nodded once and went to bed. I stayed at the table watching the snow that was not yet sticking and thought about the look on Garrett Pruitt's face when he said my name for the first time. That settling. That confirmation. He had known exactly who he was shaking hands with. The question that kept me at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning was simple and had no good answer yet. What was he planning to do with it? Hollis Vane called me the Monday after Thanksgiving. "I did some checking on Garrett Pruitt," he said. "Background, business history, public records. And he's been a general manager at 3 different resort properties over the past 20 years, Hollis said. None of them ended well for the ownership group. 2 sold under pressure. 1 went into receivership." He paused. "He's good at what he does, Cormac. I just want you to know what it is he does." I thanked him and got off the phone and stood in my office looking at the mountain through the window for a long time. Then I did nothing. Because Derek was happy in a way I had not seen in years, and I told myself that happiness deserved a chance before I brought a lawyer into it. That was the first mistake of that particular season. It was not the last. The following Thanksgiving 3 years ago, now Derek came home alone. Lacey was with her parents in Aspen. He arrived late afternoon, quieter than usual, with the particular quality of distraction that meant his mind was somewhere his body had not caught up to yet. We ate at the kitchen table, the 4 of us, Vera, Derek, Nora, who had driven up again from Durango, and me. Owen was in Portland. Paige was in Denver, finishing her last semester. Neither could make it. After dinner, Derek and I ended up on the back porch in the cold, the way we sometimes did. The sky had cleared, and the stars over the San Juans were the kind that make you feel small in a way that is not entirely unpleasant. "Dad," Derek said, "I want you to know something. I want you to be able to rest. You have worked your whole life, and I think it's time you took it easier." My chest pulled tight. I looked at my son's profile against the dark sky, the line of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders. Things I had watched change since he was 8 years old, standing in the snow with his hands going white. "I'm fine, son," I said. "I know you're fine." He turned to look at me. I'm in a position now where I can help carry things. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. I looked at him for a moment. He meant it. Whatever else was tangled up in what was coming in that moment on that porch, my son meant every word. "I know," I said. "Thank you, Derek." He nodded. We went inside. That was the last real conversation we had. After the holiday, Nora pulled me aside before she drove back to Durango. We stood by her car in the driveway, her breath making small clouds in the cold air, her hands shoved deep in her coat pockets. "Dad, I need to tell you something Derek said to me 2 years ago." Her jaw was tight the way it gets when something has been sitting in her chest too long. We were at a bar in Denver. He'd had a few drinks. He looked at me and said. She stopped, pressed her lips together. He said, "Nora, Dad likes you more than me, because you go out and shovel with him, and I won't. He thinks I'm lazy, and he's never going to say it, but I know." I felt something drop through the center of my chest. Well, I told him that was ridiculous. Nora said, her voice rough at the edges. "I told him you didn't think that, but he wasn't listening. He just kept saying you always looked at him differently." She pulled one hand out of her pocket and pressed it flat against her sternum like she was trying to hold something in. "Dad, I think that's where it started. Not Garrett. Not Lacey. Just that." I stood in the driveway after Nora's taillights disappeared around the bend. The cold came through my jacket and pressed against my ribs, and I let it. My son had spent years believing I loved him less because he would not pick up a shovel, and I had never said a single word to correct it. Christmas that year, Paige drove up from Denver. She was 29, the youngest, with her mother's directness and a habit of asking the questions everyone else circled around. We were doing dishes after dinner, just the two of us, Vera and Derek, in the other room. "Dad," Paige said, scrubbing a pot without looking at me, "can I ask you something weird?" "Go ahead. Do you have something you're not telling us?" She glanced over, then back to the pot. "Not like a health thing, just something. I've had this feeling for a while, like there's a room in the house I've never been allowed into." My throat tightened. I turned off the tap. "Paige, you don't have to tell me." She set the pot in the rack, dried her hands on the dish towel, finally looked at me. Straight on her eyes were Vera's eyes, steady and a little too perceptive. "I just wanted you to know that I noticed. I'm just an old man who likes shoveling snow," I said. She looked at me for 3 full seconds. Then she smiled, not a real smile, a smile that said she was choosing to let it go for now, and went to join her mother. I stood at the sink with the dish towel in my hands and thought about the room she had described, the one nobody had been allowed into. I had built the walls myself, 1 year at a time, one unanswered question at a time. And now my youngest daughter had walked up to the door and knocked, and I had smiled and told her there was nothing behind it. The snow started again that evening. I watched it from the kitchen window and thought about what Nora had told me in the driveway, about the bar in Denver, about the shovel. Somewhere in the middle of trying to protect my children from what money did to people, I had let my silence do something worse. Spring came late to Telluride that year. It was the second week of March when Hollis Vane called me again. Not the careful, measured call of a lawyer delivering general information, but the call of a man who had found something specific and was choosing his words with the particular precision that meant the something was serious. "Cormac," he said, "I need you to come to my office, not the phone, in person." I drove to his office in Telluride the following morning. Hollis had been my attorney for 33 years. He was 61, lean, with gray at his temples, and the unhurried manner of a man who had learned that urgency is best expressed through clarity rather than speed. His office smelled like old paper and coffee. It always had. He waited until I sat down. Then he opened a folder and turned it to face me across the desk. Soxin, someone has been conducting a quiet investigation into the ownership structure of Strand Mountain Holdings, he said. Not a government inquiry. Private. Hired research, public record searches, some attempts to access filings through back channels. He tapped the top page. It traces back to a law firm in Denver. The firm has Garrett Pruitt as a client. My jaw tightened. I had been waiting for this. I had not expected it to be this organized. How long? I asked. See, based on what I can establish, 8 months. Possibly longer. Hollis folded his hands on the desk. There is a document, Cormac. A transfer agreement. It has already been drafted by Pruitt's attorney. Your name appears on it as the signatory. The date line is blank. The room was very quiet. Outside, the last of the winter snow was melting off the roof in slow drips. He's had it ready for 8 months, I said. Shucks is at minimum, Hollis said. This was not an impulse. This was a plan with a timeline. I leaned back in my chair. I thought about Garrett Pruitt at my Thanksgiving table 4 years ago, asking his 3 careful questions. The settling in his face when he heard my name for the first time. The way he had looked at my house. He had known who I was from the beginning. And for 4 years, he had been building toward this. There's more, Hollis said. He pulled out a second page. Pruitt has been in contact with a real estate investment group out of Denver, Meridian Property Group. He has provided them with operational data on Coldwater Ridge occupancy rates, revenue figures, infrastructure assessments. Hollis looked at me steadily. He provided this information as though he had the authority to represent the property. He does not. He's trying to sell my resort, I said. He signed a preliminary letter of intent with Meridian 6 weeks ago, Hollis said. Under Colorado law that constitutes a breach of his fiduciary duty as general manager, he has a legal obligation of loyalty to Strand Mountain Holdings, not to himself. What he has done also potentially exposes him to civil liability for tortious interference with business relations. If Meridian acted on that LOI in any material way, we are looking at significant damages. I sat with that for a moment. 8 months. A drafted document with my name already on it. An LOI with a Denver investment group. Garrett Pruitt had not just been planning to take what I had built. He had been planning to sell it before I even had a chance to refuse. What do you want to do? Hollis asked. I want to wait, I said. Hollis's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. Cormac, I know what you're going to say, so you have grounds to terminate his contract today, Hollis said carefully. You have grounds to pursue civil action. You do not need to wait for anything. I need to know where Derek is in this, I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. I need to know if my son walked into this with his eyes open, or if Garrett walked him in with the lights off. I looked at Hollis across the desk. Because those are 2 very different things, and I am not going to treat them the same way until I know which one it is. Hollis held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once. I'll keep monitoring, he said. The moment this moves toward action, you call me, day or night. There's one more thing, I said. I reached into my coat and pulled out the small notebook I had carried since my father died, worn cover soft pages. I opened it to an entry from 2019 and set it on the desk in front of Hollis. The handwriting was mine. The number was $40 million. Below it, one line, not August's land to sell. Not mine either, belongs to Telluride. Hollis read it, looked up. Garrett never knew about the 2019 offer, I said. If he had, he would have understood something important. I picked the notebook up and put it back in my coat. This was never going to be for sale. Not to Meridian. Not to anyone. And the man who thinks he is about to hand it to a Denver investment group is going to find that out in a room full of 80 people. I stood up, buttoned my coat, and walked out into the March cold. Behind me, I heard Hollis pick up his phone. 3 weeks after I walked out of Hollis's office, Derek called on a Tuesday morning while I was replacing a broken gate latch on the east cabin loop. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled off my glove, checked the screen. Derek. I set the latch down in the snow and answered. Dad. His voice hit me like a door opening onto a warm room. Bright, full, the voice of the boy who used to call me from college just to talk about nothing for 20 minutes. Dad, I have news. Big news. I did tell me, I said. Garrett offered me the general manager position at Coldwater Ridge. The words came out fast, tumbling over each other, the way they did when he was a kid, reporting something he could not quite believe yet. Full GM salary, benefits, oversight of all 3 divisions. Dad, this is what I've been working toward. I stood in the snow with the broken gate latch at my feet and let my son's happiness move through the phone and into my chest, where it sat alongside everything else I was carrying. That's a big job, I said. I know it is. But Garrett says I'm ready. He's been watching how I handle things for 2 years, and he says I have the instincts for it. Derek's voice softened slightly. I wanted you to hear it from me first, before anyone else. I'm glad you called, I said. Are you proud of me, Dad? The question landed with the full weight of 40 years behind it. The boy on the phone asking it was the same boy who had stood in the snow at 8 years old, with his hands going white, refusing to go inside. I'm always proud of you, I said. Always have been. He made a sound that was not quite a word and got off the phone shortly after. I stood there holding my cell phone in the cold for a long moment. Then I put my glove back on and picked up the gate latch. What Derek did not know, what he had no way of knowing, was that 6 months earlier, I had called Garrett Pruitt myself. It was a Sunday morning in November, 2 days after that first Thanksgiving with the Pruitts, when I had watched Garrett ask his 3 careful questions and look at my house with calculating eyes. I had called him before Hollis found the drafted transfer agreement. Before I understood the full shape of what Garrett was building, I had called because Derek had been drifting for years, and I did not know how to reach him with words, so I tried the only other language I had. Give him a real opportunity, I told Garrett on that call. Something with responsibility. Let him prove himself. Garrett had agreed without hesitation. Of course he had. I was his employer. He could not have said no to me if he wanted to. What I had not understood then was that he had already been planning to use Derek as the instrument of his scheme, and my call had simply handed him the tool with the handle already pointed in his direction. I finished the gate latch, walked back to the maintenance shed. Frank Odell was inside sharpening a blade, the metallic scrape of it filling the small space. Derek got the GM position, I said. Frank set the blade down, looked at me. Garrett offered it. Yes. Frank's mouth pressed into a flat line. You going to tell Derek, not yet? Frank picked the blade back up and went back to sharpening. You know how this ends if you wait too long, he said. Not accusing, just saying. I know, I said. The day Derek started as general manager, I drove to the resort at 7 in the morning the way I did every morning. Parked in the maintenance lot. Got my shovel. Worked the front walk, the east path, the drainage channel. At 9 o'clock, a black SUV pulled into the main guest lot. Derek stepped out in a new coat, charcoal gray wool, the kind that costs more than I spent on clothes in a year. He stood at the entrance to the main lodge and looked up at the building with the expression of a man arriving somewhere he had always meant to be. He did not look toward the maintenance lot. I watched him from across the parking area, my shovel in my hands, and I felt something move through me that I could not name. Precisely pride and grief pressed so close together, they were indistinguishable. That afternoon, Lacey came to the resort for a tour. Derek walked her through the main lodge, the restaurant, the event ballroom. I was replacing a supply line fitting in the utility corridor when they passed the open doorway. Lacey glanced in, saw me crouched on the floor with a wrench, and said to Derek without lowering her voice, "Is that the maintenance man your father knows?" Derek looked in. Our eyes met for just a fraction of a second. Then he looked away. "That's my dad," he said. Lacey's pace did not slow. She said in the tone people use when they have decided a subject is closed. I turned back to the supply line. My hands were steady. My jaw was not. Frank appeared in the corridor 10 minutes later with a cup of coffee and held it out without saying anything. I took it, drank half of it standing in the utility corridor while the sound of Lacey's heels clicked away down the hallway above us. That evening, Owen called from Portland to congratulate his brother. Then he called me. "Hey, Dad." His voice was careful in the way it got when he was managing something. "I heard about Derek. That's great for him." "It is," I said. A pause. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." 3 years ago, I applied for an operations coordinator position at Coldwater Ridge. I never heard back. Not even a rejection. Another pause. "Did you know about that?" My throat tightened so fast it almost hurt. "I heard about it after the fact," I said carefully. "I'm sorry, Owen. That should not have happened." Owen was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said finally, in the tone that meant it was not okay, but he was choosing not to push. "Okay. I love you, Dad." "I love you too, son." I got off the phone and sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time. The mountains had gone dark. The resort lights were visible on the ridge, warm and gold against the sky. My son was managing a property he did not know belonged to his father. My other son had been quietly shut out of an opportunity by his brother and had spent 3 years not knowing why. My youngest daughter had asked me a question at the kitchen sink, and I had smiled and told her there was no room. I sat in the dark and understood that the thing I had built to protect my children had spent years protecting them from each other. I did not go upstairs until 11:30. The house was quiet when I came in, the particular quiet of a November night in Telluride, when the snow has stopped and the cold has settled in completely, and there is nothing moving outside, not even wind. I hung my coat, pulled off my boots, started for the stairs. The kitchen light was on. Vera was at the table. In front of her on the wood surface she had scrubbed clean 10,000 times since 1986 was a small envelope. Cream-colored, slightly yellowed at the edges. August Strand written across the front in my father's handwriting, the careful, deliberate print of a man who had taught himself to write as an adult and never entirely lost the self-consciousness of it. The envelope was open. I stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at my wife. She was 65 years old, and she had the same straight spine she'd had at 22. But tonight, something in her shoulders was different. Not slumped, not broken, just settled the way a person settles after they have finally done the thing they have been putting off for a very long time. "You opened it," I said. 21 years, Cormac." Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something that had been carried a long distance. "I decided tonight was the right time." I came to the table and sat down across from her. She slid the envelope toward me. I reached in and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. My father's handwriting, thinner and more uneven than I remembered the hand of a man who was already ill when he wrote it. Vera, you are the one who keeps that family standing straight. I have watched you do it for 19 years, and I want you to know that I see it even when Cormac does not say so. He loves you in the way that men like us love, which is completely and mostly silently, which is a failing I am sorry to pass on to my son. There is one thing I need you to do for me. When the time comes, and you will know when, do not let him wait any longer. He will always find a reason to wait. He waited on the land, he waited on the resort, he waited on every hard conversation he has ever had to have. It is how he is built. You are the one who has to tell him when waiting is over. The envelope is yours. Open it whenever you need to, or never. But if you ever need permission to push him, this is it. August. I set the letter down on the table. The kitchen felt very small and very warm. Outside the window, the mountains were invisible in the dark, just shapes I knew were there. He knew you, I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected. He knew both of us, Vera said. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, not gently, firmly, the hand of a woman who had made a decision. Cormac, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. All right. Did you know about what Garrett has been doing before tonight? I looked at my wife's face, the lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her mouth was set. Since March, I said. Something moved across her face, not anger, something more complicated than anger. A kind of exhausted recognition. 8 months, she said. I needed to know if Derek... I know why you waited. She pressed her hand down harder on mine. Cormac. Derek walked into that man's plan with his eyes wide open or his eyes wide shut. Either way, you waiting 8 months did not change which one it was. It just gave Garrett 8 more months. The truth of it hit me in the sternum. You're right, I said. I know I'm right. She pulled her hand back and folded both of hers on the table. So tomorrow, you are going to walk into that room and you are going to be every inch of what August built and what you built on top of it. And you are not going to let that man hand your son a pen and watch him sign away the thing your father dug out of frozen ground. I looked at my wife for a long moment. 39 years. The diner booth in 85. Every winter since. Hollis is in town, I said. He's been waiting in the parking lot since 6 this evening. Vera's chin came up a fraction. Good. I told Frank to keep the sound system running. Full record. Good. I'm not going to sign anything. I know you're not. She stood up from the table, picked up the letter, and folded it back into the envelope with the careful hands of a woman returning something precious to its place. Come to bed, Cormac. You need to sleep. I watched her move toward the hallway. At the doorway, she stopped without turning around. He would have been proud of you, she said. August. Not for what you built. For the fact that you still go out every morning and do the work yourself. A pause. That was always the thing he was most proud of. She went upstairs. I sat at the table alone for another few minutes, my hands flat on the wood surface, looking at the place where the envelope had been. Then I turned off the kitchen light and went up after her. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark next to Vera and listened to her breathing even out and slow, and I watched the ceiling and thought about my father's handwriting on a piece of paper that had been in a drawer for 21 years, waiting for the right moment. At some point around 3 in the morning, I stopped trying to pretend I was going to sleep and just lay there with my eyes open, letting the thoughts come without fighting them. At 4 o'clock, I got up, I dressed in the dark work pants thermal undershirt, the heavy flannel I had owned so long the cuffs were frayed at the edges. I carried my boots downstairs and put them on in the kitchen so I would not wake Vera. Pulled on my coat. Reached by the back door for the one thing I always reached for. August's shovel. Ash handle iron blade, the slight left lean in the balance from 40 years of use. It was the most familiar object I owned. More familiar than anything else I had ever held. I stepped outside. The cold hit me the way it always does in Telluride in November, not gradually, but all at once, like stepping into cold water. The thermometer on the porch rail read 12 degrees. The sky was that particular deep black that comes between 3 and 5 in the morning, before even the suggestion of gray at the edges of the mountains. A fresh 2 inches had come down overnight. The driveway was a smooth, white surface, unmarked by anything. I started at the top of the walk and worked down toward the road. Push and lift and redirect. The same motion my father had taught me when I was 7, standing in this same cold, in this same dark, on land he was just beginning to understand was going to become something. In the quiet, I heard his voice the way I sometimes do when it is very cold and very dark and there is no one else around. Don't push the snow, Cormac. Lead it. There's a difference. I stopped moving for a moment. Just stood there in the dark, with the shovel handle in both hands and the cold pressing against my face, and let the memory of that voice be as real as it was going to get. Derek had never learned to shovel properly. He pushed straight ahead, the way people do when they have not been taught otherwise, and the snow came back on him and he got frustrated and quit. I had tried to show him once he was maybe 12, and he had looked at me with the expression 12-year-olds use when they have decided the lesson is not worth the effort. I had let it go. I always let things go with Derek when I should have stood my ground and pushed through the friction. The pattern of a man's whole life is usually visible in the small things, if you know how to look. I finished the front walk, moved to the side path, then the steps to the back deck where the snow always drifted deep in the north corner. The work warmed me from the inside out, the way physical work always does, a heat that starts in the shoulders and spreads down through the arms and chest and settles eventually into something close to peace. I was finishing the back steps when the kitchen light came on. A minute later, the back door opened and Vera came out in her heavy coat and her wool hat with the ear flaps she had owned since the early 90s. And would not replace because she said it still worked fine. She was carrying 2 mugs. She crossed the deck and held one out to me without saying anything. I took it. The coffee was so hot I could feel it through my gloves. We stood there together on the back deck in the dark, at 5 in the morning. Looking out at the mountains we could not see but knew were there. The way you know the presence of people who have been part of your life so long, you feel them even when you cannot see them. I was wrong to wait, I said. My breath made a cloud in the cold air. Not just 8 months, all of it. Derek should have known who he was walking into that resort to manage. He should have known years ago. Yes, Vera said. She did not soften it. She never had. If I had told him, I stopped, started again. If I had sat him down when I promised I would when he was 30, none of this would have been possible. Garrett would have had nothing to work with. Maybe, Vera said. Or maybe Derek would have found a different way to be who he's been becoming. You don't know. She wrapped both hands around her mug. What you know is tonight. I looked at the dark shapes of the mountains against the slightly lighter darkness of the sky. I'm not afraid of tonight, I said. I know you're not. She turned to look at me, her face barely visible in the light coming from the kitchen window. Are you afraid of Derek? The question took a moment to land. I'm afraid of looking at him. I said, and not finding the boy who stood in the snow with his hands going white. My throat tightened around the words. That's what I'm afraid of. Not losing the resort. Losing the version of him I've been holding on to. Vera reached over and put her free hand on my arm. Just rested it there, heavy and warm. You might lose it, she said quietly. That version might already be gone. But tonight is where you find out what's left. And whatever's left, that's what you work with. We finished the coffee, went inside. I showered and changed into the clothes I had set out the night before. Not a suit, I did not own a suit that fit anymore. Dark slacks, a button shirt, the good boots I wore to formal occasions. Vera straightened my collar in the hallway mirror, the way she had straightened it before every important thing in our life together. Ready, she said. I reached into my coat pocket. The small notebook was there. I felt its worn cover under my fingertips. Yes, I said. I held the back door for her. We walked to the truck together through the snow I had cleared in the dark before dawn, leaving 2 sets of footprints on the fresh white surface. I started the engine. The heater came on slow. The drive to Coldwater Ridge took 11 minutes. I had driven it 10,000 times. Tonight it felt like the first time and the last time pressed together into the same 11 minutes. I pulled into the maintenance lot out of habit. Cut the engine. Through the windshield, the main lodge was lit up gold against the November dark, warm and full and beautiful, the way something is beautiful when you built it, and you know every scar underneath the surface. I sat there for a moment with my hands in my lap. Then I got out of the truck and walked toward the light. The first thing I noticed when I walked into the ballroom was the flowers. White arrangements on every table, tall and full, the kind that cost enough to matter at an event like this. They were beautiful. They were also, I knew, from 30 years of operating this property, not from our usual supplier. Someone had brought them in from outside. Someone who wanted to put their own mark on the room. Garrett Pruitt had been redecorating my ballroom. Vera took my arm as we crossed the entrance. The room was already 3/4 full, 80 guests in their good clothes, moving between tables, the low, steady sound of a crowd that knows it is at something important. The lighting was warm and low, the chandelier dimmed to the flattering gold that made everyone look their best, and softened the slight wear on the carpet near the east wall that I had been meaning to replace since last spring. I had chosen every fixture in this room. I knew where every wire ran. Our seats were at a table near the back. I noted this without expression and pulled out Vera's chair. "Maintenance staff gets the back row," she said under her breath, sitting down. "Best view in the house," I said. Frank Odell was already there, 3 tables over in a dark suit that looked like it had been pressed within the last hour. He caught my eye across the room and gave me the smallest nod, the nod of a man who has done what he was asked to do and is waiting to see what comes next. Good. The soundboard was running. Everything was in place. I scanned the room the way I always scanned it, not as a guest, as an owner. Tables anchored correctly, no trip hazards near the service corridor fire exit on the east wall unobstructed. 22 years of Frank's work visible in every clean surface and smoothly running piece of equipment. Mayor Patricia Dunn was at the VIP table near the front, in a dark blazer and the particular expression of a public official who has learned to look interested at all times. She had been mayor for 2 terms. I had attended exactly 1 town function in that time, and she had thanked me for my support of the winter employment program without knowing she was thanking me. I had kept it that way deliberately. At the table nearest the stage, a young man in his early 30s had a camera bag at his feet and a reporter's notebook on the table beside his dinner plate. Marcus Webb. I had seen his byline in the Telluride Daily Planet for the past 4 years. He was good, thorough, fair, the kind of reporter who checked things before he printed them. Garrett had invited him to cover Derek's promotion. He was going to get a different story. Garrett himself was working the room with the practiced ease of a man who had spent his career making other people feel like they were the most important person in the space. Handshakes, shoulder grips, the easy laugh deployed at exactly the right intervals. He moved through the crowd, and the crowd moved around him, and if you did not know what you were looking at, you would have assumed he owned the place. Derek stood near the front of the room with Lacey at his side receiving congratulations, with the slightly overwhelmed brightness of a man who had not yet fully processed that this was real. He looked good. He looked happy. He looked for a moment very much like the boy who had called me from college just to talk. My chest pulled tight, and I made myself breathe through it. He looks like himself tonight, Vera said quietly beside me. She had seen it too. Get the good version, I said. Same words she had used 4 years ago, first Thanksgiving with the Pruitts. Then Lacey leaned up and said something in Derek's ear, and he straightened slightly, and the brightness shifted into something more managed, more performed, and the boy was gone again behind the general manager. Paige appeared at my elbow from somewhere. She had driven up from Denver, and she looked like she had come straight from work, professional clothes. Hair still neat, but her eyes were moving across the room with the alert attention she had inherited from her mother. "Dad," she said, leaning close. "I don't like the way Garrett keeps looking at you." "I know," I said. "He keeps looking over here and then looking away too fast." She pressed her lips together. "Like he's checking on something." "He is," I said. Paige looked at me for a moment with those two perceptive eyes. Then she said very quietly, "You're ready for whatever tonight is, aren't you?" It was not entirely a question. "Have you talked to your brother lately?" I asked her. Her expression shifted. Something complicated moved across it. Grief and frustration pressed together. "He doesn't call much anymore," she said. "When he does, it's about the resort, about what he's working on. He doesn't ask about us." She looked toward Derek across the room. "He didn't used to be like that." "I know," I said. Nora arrived 5 minutes later and took the seat on Vera's other side. She reached across her mother and squeezed my hand once hard, deliberate, and said nothing else. She had driven 3 hours from Durango, and her jaw had the set of a woman who had decided something on the drive up. Garrett Pruitt took the stage at 7 o'clock, precisely. The room settled the way rooms settle for someone who commands them. I watched 80 people give him their attention and thought about the first time he had sat at my Thanksgiving table and asked his 3 careful questions and looked at my house like a number he was calculating. "Good evening," Garrett said into the microphone, and his voice filled my ballroom like he had been speaking in it his whole life. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate a remarkable young man and a new chapter for Coldwater Ridge Lodge." He paused, smiled, let the room lean toward him. I reached into my coat pocket, felt the worn cover of August's notebook under my fingertips. Then I picked up the dinner menu and began to read it. What happened at that dinner table I spent 40 years trying to prevent it, and it still came. Before I tell you how it started, comment "stay," so I know you're here. This is the moment everything breaks open. Note this story contains some fictional elements shaped for narrative purposes. You're welcome to step away here, if that's not your preference. Garrett gave 2 toasts. The first was to Coldwater Ridge Lodge, its history, its growth, its future under new leadership. He spoke about the resort, the way a man speaks about something he has earned, and I sat at my table in the back of my ballroom and listened to him describe 40 years of my family's work as though it had arrived fully formed the moment he signed his employment contract. Vera's hand found my knee under the table. She pressed down once firm and left it there. The second toast was to Derek, his vision, his instincts, his readiness. Derek stood when Garrett raised his glass, and the room stood with him. And for a moment, my son was everything the room needed him to be: tall and certain and lit up by 79 people believing in him all at once. He caught my eye across the room, just for a second. Then he looked away. I raised my glass with everyone else. Garrett found me between the salad course and the main. I had watched him working toward me for 10 minutes, stopping at tables, making conversation, redirecting the way a man moves through a room when he wants to arrive somewhere without appearing to have intended it. He was good. I will give him that. He sat down in the empty chair beside me with the ease of a man dropping in for a friendly word. Cormac. He set a leather folder on the table between us, his hand resting on top of it. Good to see you here tonight. This is a big moment for Derek. It is, I said. I wanted to talk to you about something small. His voice was warm, unhurried, the voice of a man doing a favor. Just a housekeeping item, really. A document that would clarify the management structure going forward, make things cleaner on paper for Derek's role. He pushed the folder toward me and opened it to the first page. It's straightforward. Just needs your signature, and we're done. I looked at the folder. Then I picked it up. I read the first page slowly. Then the second. On the third page, halfway down, I found what I was looking for, my name typed in the signature block. Cormac J. Strand. The date line next to it was blank. The document had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I could feel the age of it in the crispness of the paper, the precision of the formatting. This had been prepared by someone who knew what they were doing and had been done with care. Below my name, the language was clear enough for anyone to read: all rights, interests, and ownership claims pertaining to Strand Mountain Holdings, LLC, and its subsidiaries, including Coldwater Ridge Lodge, to be transferred in full to Derek Allen Strand and Lacey Ann Strand jointly. Jointly. Not just Derek. Lacey, too. I set the folder down on the table, looked at Garrett. I need to read this more carefully, I said. His smile did not waver. Of course. Take your time. He stood, smoothed his jacket. But don't take too long, Cormac. Tonight's a celebration. No need to let paperwork slow things down. He moved away toward another table, easy and unhurried, as though he had just asked me to sign a birthday card. I sat with the folder in front of me and breathed. Vera leaned close. What is it? Everything, I said quietly. The whole company. To Derek and Lacey jointly. I turned the folder so she could see the page. Prepared months ago. My name was already on it. Her breath came out slow and controlled. She looked at the page for a long moment. Then she looked at me. She had understood. I closed the folder. Across the room, Derek was laughing at something. A guest had set his hand on the back of Lacey's chair at ease, in a way I had not seen him in years. And then Garrett touched his arm and said something in his ear, and something changed in Derek's posture. A subtle squaring of the shoulders, a setting of the jaw, the look of a man who has been reminded of a task he has been putting off. He excused himself from the guests. He picked up his champagne glass. He walked toward my table. My heart did not race. It dropped slowly, heavily, the way something drops when you already know it is falling and you have already accepted it. Owen saw him coming. He put his fork down and straightened in his chair. Nora's hand went still on her wine glass. Paige looked at me and then at her brother, and her face went very careful. Derek stopped at the edge of our table. He stood there for a moment, looking down at me with an expression I had never seen on my son's face before, something between determination and discomfort. The expression of a man who has told himself a story about what he is doing and is saying it loudly enough inside his own head that he cannot hear anything else. Dad. His voice came out louder than the table required. Several nearby guests turned. Dad, I need you to sign this tonight. It's time. He set his champagne glass down on the table, and his hand was not entirely steady. You've been around long enough. I don't need you looking over my shoulder anymore. This is my career now, my future. Sign the paper and let me run my own life. He pulled the folder from in front of me and opened it to the signature page. He held it up. His jaw was set. His eyes were bright with something that was not happiness. Sign it, Dad. His voice rose another register, and the tables around us went quiet. And then the quiet spread outward like a stone dropped in water until the nearest third of the room had stopped their conversations and turned. You've been a burden long enough. We're grown. We don't need a maintenance man following us around. His voice cracked on the last words, and he covered it with volume. He slapped the folder down on the table in front of me and pointed at the signature line. Sign it. You're nothing but a parasite. You always have been. The word landed in the room like a physical thing. Parasite. The music from the speakers continued for exactly 3 more seconds. Then someone near the sound system must have noticed, because it faded out, and the room was absolutely silent in the way rooms go silent when something has happened that cannot be taken back. 80 people. Not a fork moving, not a glass lifting. I looked at my son standing over me with his finger on a signature line, and his face flushed, and his hand still not entirely steady, and I felt something move through me that was not anger and was not grief, but was something older than both of them, the particular pain of a man who has just watched the thing he was most afraid of become real. I looked at the folder in front of me. Then I looked up at Derek, and I reached for it. My hand closed around the folder. Not the pen. The folder. I pulled it toward me, opened it to the first page, and began to read out loud. I did not shout. I did not stand. I simply read in the same voice I use when I am going through a maintenance report or checking supply invoices, steady, clear, unhurried, and the words of the document filled the silent ballroom, the way water fills a low place, finding every corner. Transfer agreement. I read. Entered into by Cormac J. Strand hereinafter the transferring party, and Derek Allen Strand and Lacey Ann Strand hereinafter the receiving parties. In consideration of the foregoing, the transferring party agrees to relinquish all ownership rights, interests, and claims pertaining to Strand Mountain Holdings, LLC, including but not limited to Coldwater Ridge Lodge, and all associated properties, revenues, and contractual agreements. I looked up. That's me, I said to the room. The transferring party. Everything I own. Signed over. Tonight. Derek's flush had deepened. Garrett had appeared at the edge of the table, standing slightly behind Derek's right shoulder, and his face was doing something complicated, the controlled expression of a man recalculating in real time. I turned back to the folder and kept reading. Then the chair beside Garrett scraped back hard against the floor. Vera stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. 39 years of marriage had given her a register below shouting that carried farther than shouting ever could. And when she spoke, the nearby tables heard every word with perfect clarity. Derek Allen Strand, she said. You will look at me right now. Derek turned. His face, when he met his mother's eyes, lost some of its certainty the way a flame loses height in a draft. You called your father a parasite, Vera said, in front of 80 people, in a building he owns. Her voice did not shake. It was the steadiest thing in the room. I want you to think very carefully about what you just said. And I want you to think about who taught you the word for that, and why. Derek opened his mouth. Vera held up one hand, not aggressive, just definitive, and he closed it. Owen was on his feet before anyone saw him move. He came around the table fast, and for a moment I thought he was going to put himself between Derek and me physically, but he stopped 2 feet short and turned to face his brother instead. And when he spoke, his voice had a rawness in it that I recognized the voice of someone who has been holding something in for a long time and has run out of room. Hachun, do you know? Owen said, his jaw so tight the words came out clipped, that I have been sending Mom and Dad $800 a month for 6 years. His hands were at his sides and they were shaking, not with anger, with the effort of keeping the anger contained. 6 years, Derek. Because I thought Dad was struggling. Because I thought he was just a guy who worked maintenance and I didn't want them to go without. He took one step closer to his brother. And you knew more than I did. You had access to everything I didn't. And you stood up there tonight and thanked Garrett Pruitt for giving you your career. You didn't say Dad's name once. Derek stared at his brother. Something moved behind his eyes, something that looked for just a second like the beginning of understanding. Then Garrett put a hand on Derek's shoulder, and the moment closed. Nora did not stand up. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out her phone. She opened the camera. She pointed it at Derek and Garrett and held it there without a word. "Put that away," Derek said. "Keep going," Nora said. Her voice was flat, and her hand was rock steady. "I'm listening." Paige was already gone from the table. I had not seen her leave, but I heard the ballroom door open and close, and I knew where she had gone. 2 minutes later, the door opened again, and she was back, phone in hand, and she looked at me across the table with her mother's eyes and said, "He's on his way in, Dad." Hollis. I gave her the smallest nod. At the end of the table, Garrett straightened. He had made his recalculation. He stepped forward past Derek and faced the room with the bearing of a man resuming control of a situation that had briefly gotten away from him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a man who had managed rooms for 30 years. "I apologize for this interruption. This is a family matter and it will be resolved privately." He looked at me with eyes that had gone flat and direct. "Cormac, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. You know as well as I do how this ends. Sign the document tonight, and we all go home." He reached into his jacket and produced a pen. Held it out across the table toward me. 80 people watched the pen hang in the air between us. I looked at the pen. I looked at Garrett's hand holding it. I thought about the settled expression on his face the first time he heard my name, that small confirmation, that click of recognition. He had known from the beginning. He had spent 4 years building toward this single moment, this pen in this room, and he was standing here with the absolute certainty of a man who has never once considered that the thing he is reaching for might not be there when his hand closes. I put both my hands flat on the table. "I would like to read the rest of the document," I said. Garrett's jaw tightened by a fraction. "Cormac." "Out loud," I said. "To everyone here." The pen was still in the air. Garrett had not moved. And from somewhere near the back of the room, the ballroom door opened one more time, and I heard the particular sound of leather soles on hardwood that I had known for 33 years. Hollis Vane had arrived. Hollis Vane walked like a man who had nowhere urgent to be and nothing to prove by arriving. He came through the ballroom door at an unhurried pace, his calf-leather briefcase in one hand, his other hand free, and he did not look at Garrett or Derek or the folder on the table or the pen still hanging in the air between Garrett's fingers. He looked at me. I gave him the smallest nod. He pulled out a chair at the nearest empty table, set his briefcase on it, and stood beside it without opening it yet. Garrett watched him cross the room. The pen was still in his hand, and the certainty he had been carrying since he walked into my ballroom was still in his face, but underneath it, something had shifted, a tightening around the eyes, a recalculation running fast behind his expression. He recognized Hollis. I had known he would. 8 months of investigating Strand Mountain Holdings meant 8 months of encountering the name Hollis Vane on every significant document. Garrett knew exactly who had just walked in. He recovered faster than I expected. Cormac. His voice came out warm and measured the professional warmth of a man who has been managing difficult rooms for 30 years. He turned slightly so the nearby tables could hear him making the moment public, making it reasonable. This is a simple document. Your son deserves clarity about his future here. A father who loves his son signs the paper and lets the boy get on with his life. He set the pen on the table in front of me with a small, precise click. You have no other choice that makes sense tonight. The room held its breath. Then Nadine Pruitt's chair scraped back. She had been sitting at the VIP table near the front, quiet through everything, through Derek's words, through Owen standing up, through Nora's phone, through all of it. Now she stood, and she did not look at her husband, and she walked across the ballroom in the way a woman walks when she has made a decision that is going to cost her and has decided the cost is acceptable. She pulled out the empty chair beside Vera and sat down. Garrett's head turned toward her. Nadine, I heard what that boy said to his father. Nadine said, not looking at her husband. Her voice was level and a little tired, the voice of a woman addressing something she should have addressed a long time ago. I'm sitting here. Lacey's face went the color of the white tablecloth. Garrett turned back to me. The warmth in his voice had gone. What replaced it was not anger, it was something colder and more businesslike. Cormac, I have legal documentation supporting this transfer. My attorneys have reviewed it. This is going to happen one way or another. The only question is whether it happens tonight with your cooperation or in a courtroom next year without it. I picked up the pen. The room leaned in the way it had been leaning all evening toward what it expected toward the ending it had already written. Derek's shoulders dropped a fraction. Garrett's jaw unclenched by a degree. At the back of the room, Frank Odell's hands went flat on the table in front of him, and every line of his body went still. I held the pen over the signature line. I thought about August standing on frozen ground in 1974, looking at nothing and seeing everything. I thought about Derek at 8 years old in the snow refusing to go inside. I thought about the notebook in my coat pocket with $40 million written in it and one line beneath it, not August's land to sell. Then I set the pen down, not signing, just setting it down flat on the table parallel to the document. I looked up at Garrett. I want to hear from my attorney first, I said. Garrett's expression did not break, but something behind it did, a hairline fracture invisible to most of the room, clear as glass to me. Hollis stepped forward from the table where he had been standing. He did not raise his voice. It was not necessary. Before any document is executed tonight, Hollis said, I want to clarify the legal status of what is in front of Mr. Strand. He opened his briefcase and removed a single sheet of paper, which he set on the table beside the transfer agreement. Under Colorado law, a transfer of ownership in an LLC requires at minimum notarization of the signing party's signature independent legal counsel for the transferring party and full disclosure of the company's current valuation. He looked at the document on the table. This document has none of those. Additionally, it is being presented to Mr. Strand in a public setting under evident family and social pressure, following a direct verbal attack on his character. He looked at Garrett. That set of circumstances constitutes duress under Colorado statute. A document signed under duress is voidable at any time by the signing party. It protects no one. The room was absolutely still. Furthermore, Hollis continued, his voice the same throughout, calm, precise, unhurried. I have reviewed the document itself. The transfer language is constructed to convey not merely management authority, but full ownership rights. This is not a housekeeping document. It is a transfer of a privately held company valued at, he glanced down at his sheet of paper, $94 million at current assessment. $94 million. The number went into the room the way a stone goes into still water. You could see it travel, the slight movement of heads, the small, involuntary adjustments of posture, the way the air changed. Derek's champagne glass was still in his hand. He set it down on the nearest surface without looking at it. He was staring at Hollis. Garrett's voice came out lower than before, stripped of warmth entirely. This is a private family matter. Your involvement, Meoster, I represent Strand Mountain Holdings, LLC, Hollis said. That makes it my professional involvement, not a personal one. He looked at Garrett with the steady, patient eyes of a man who has spent 33 years in rooms exactly like this one. And I think there are a few other things the people in this room should know. Mayor Patricia Dunn, at the VIP table, had set down her water glass. Marcus Webb's pen had not moved in 2 minutes. Frank Odell was watching Garrett with the particular expression of a man who has been waiting a long time to watch something happen. Garrett looked across the table at me. For the first time since he had sat down beside me with his leather folder and his friendly voice, I saw something in his face that was not calculation. It was the look of a man who has just realized the room he thought he was running was never his to run. Cormac, he said, just my name. Nothing after it. Let him finish, I said. Hollis did not rush. He had been a lawyer for 33 years, and he understood that the value of information was not just in the content, but in the delivery, in the space you gave it to. Land in the silence you let follow it, so the room could process what it had just heard. He stood at the edge of the table with his briefcase open and his papers in order, and he spoke the way he always spoke, which was the way August had taught me to shovel snow, not pushing, leading. Coldwater Ridge Lodge, he said, was established on land acquired by August Clement Strand in 1974. The property was developed over the following 29 years by August Strand and his son Cormac James Strand, working in partnership. In 2003, August Strand passed the land and all associated structures to Cormac Strand by notarized will, which cleared probate in 2004 without challenge. He set a page on the table beside the transfer agreement, face up, the probate stamp visible from several feet away. In 2006, Cormac Strand formally incorporated Strand Mountain Holdings, LLC, as the operating entity for the property. He has been the sole owner and managing member since the date of incorporation. I watched Derek's face across the table. He was very still. His champagne glass was somewhere behind him on a surface he had stopped caring about. His eyes were moving between Hollis and me and back to Hollis, and I could see the arithmetic running the arithmetic. I had spent 40 years making sure nobody could run the numbers lining up for the first time in his life in an order he had never considered. In 2016, Hollis continued, Cormac Strand hired Garrett William Pruitt as general manager of Coldwater Ridge Lodge under a standard hospitality management contract. Mr. Pruitt's role was operational oversight of day-to-day management staff supervision and guest services. The contract explicitly excludes any ownership interest or authority, to represent the property in transactions. Hollis looked at Garrett steadily. Mr. Pruitt does not own any part of Coldwater Ridge Lodge. He has never owned any part of it. He is an employee of Strand Mountain Holdings, LLC. His employer is the man sitting at this table. The sentence landed. I watched it hit Derek. Not the way news hits when you hear it and understand it all at once, but the way something hits when you hear it and your mind refuses the first time, and you have to hear it again inside your own head before it becomes real. His mouth opened slightly. He looked at Garrett. "You work for my father," Derek said. His voice came out stripped of everything, the certainty, the performance, the volume. Just the words, flat and bewildered. "You have been working for my father this whole time." Garrett said nothing. The pen was still on the table in front of me. From somewhere in the middle of the room, a man stood up. I recognized him, the representative from Meridian Property Group in Denver, the man Garrett had invited to witness what he had planned to be a transfer of ownership. He had driven 4 hours from Denver for this evening. He had signed a preliminary letter of intent with Garrett 6 weeks ago. He looked at me across the room with the expression of a man who has just understood that every assumption he walked in with was wrong. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice carried in the quiet. "Did you say Strand Mountain Holdings, as in Cormac Strand is the principal?" "He is," Hollis said. The man from Denver sat back down slowly. He reached for his jacket pocket and took out his phone and looked at it, and then put it away. He looked at Garrett. Then he looked at the table in front of him and did not look up again. "I tried to acquire Strand Mountain Holdings in 2021. He said mostly to himself, though the room was quiet enough that everyone heard. "They declined. I was told the company was not available at any price." A pause. "I never found out who the principal was." He had found out now. Marcus Webb's pen was moving again fast and steady, filling his notebook with the kind of notes that meant a story had just changed entirely. Mayor Patricia Dunn had both hands flat on the table in front of her. She was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on a public official's face in a long time, something uncalculated, something close to wonder. 12 years of anonymous donations to the Winter Employment Program. 12 years of budget line items that said private donor and nothing else. She was putting it together now in real time in front of 80 people. Derek turned to his father-in-law. His voice when it came was so stripped of everything that it barely sounded like him. "Garrett." He stopped, swallowed. "Tell me you didn't know. Tell me you didn't walk into my parents' house at Thanksgiving and sit across from my father and ask him 3 questions about the resort and know the whole time that he stopped again. His hand came up and pressed flat against his own sternum hard, like a man checking that something is still there. "Tell me you didn't know." Garrett looked at Derek for a long moment. He did not tell him that. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full-packed with 4 years of dinners and conversations and a promotion that had been offered not out of belief but out of strategy. And Derek was standing in the middle of all of it, with his hand pressed to his chest and the color draining from his face in a way that had nothing to do with the champagne. Lacey's hand went to his arm. He did not seem to feel it. I looked at my son across the table. The general manager was gone. The certainty was gone. The man standing across from me now had the lost, unsteady look of someone who has just discovered that the ground they have been standing on was built by someone else on foundations they never bothered to examine. For the first time all evening, he looked like someone I recognized. Hollis set one more page on the table. He did not make a speech about it. He simply placed it face up where the light could reach it and said quietly to me, "Whenever you're ready, Cormac." I looked at the page. Then I looked around the room at Frank Odell at the back table, at Mayor Dunn with her hands flat, and her eyes wide open at Marcus Webb, still writing, at Owen standing, with his hands finally still at his sides, at Nora, with her phone lowered at Paige, watching me with Vera's eyes, at Vera sitting straight beside Nadine Pruitt, her hands folded on the table, watching me the way she had watched me for 39 years, steady, certain, not afraid of whatever came next. I stood up. I had been sitting at that table for 2 hours. I stood up the way I stand up from every chair, slowly, without drama, the way a man stands when his knees have 68 years in them, and he has learned that most things worth doing do not require an entrance. I straightened my jacket. I put both hands in my pockets. I looked at Hollis and gave him a nod that meant, go ahead and finish. Hollis turned one more page in his folder. There is one additional matter, he said, that I want to bring to the attention of everyone present. He did not look at Garrett when he said it. He looked at the room, at the 80 people who had come tonight expecting a celebration and had stayed for something they would be talking about for the rest of their lives. Mr. Garrett Pruitt, in his capacity as general manager of Coldwater Ridge Lodge, entered into preliminary negotiations with Meridian Property Group of Denver, Colorado, with the stated intention of facilitating the sale of this property. Hollis set a document on the table, 2 pages, stapled the Meridian letterhead visible at the top. A letter of intent was signed 6 weeks ago. Mr. Pruitt represented himself in those negotiations as having authority to sell. He does not have that authority. He has never had that authority. The man from Meridian, still seated at his table in the middle of the room, rubbed one hand across his mouth and stared at the tablecloth. Under Colorado law, Hollis continued, a general manager acting outside the scope of his contractual authority to the financial detriment of his employer constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty. The letter of intent with Meridian, combined with the transfer agreement presented to Mr. Strand tonight, constitutes a pattern of conduct that exposes Mr. Pruitt to significant civil liability, including but not limited to damages for tortious interference with business relations and breach of the duty of loyalty. He looked at Garrett for the first time since entering the room. I will be filing the relevant paperwork with the Colorado courts on Monday morning. Garrett's hand resting on the back of Derek's chair went very still. Derek was looking at his father-in-law with an expression I had never seen on my son's face before. Not anger, not shock, but something more fundamental than either of those things. The look of a man who has just understood that he was not the architect of anything. He had been the instrument. He had been the tool Garrett needed, with a handle already pointed in the right direction. And he had walked into it with his eyes open and his hands out, and called it his career. His chest rose and fell once hard. You used me, Derek said. His voice was very quiet. Quiet the way things go quiet when they are about to break. You sat at my father's table. You shook his hand. You told me for 4 years that you believed in me. His jaw tightened until the muscle jumped in his cheek. And you were using me the whole time. Garrett looked at his son-in-law. For a moment, just a moment, something moved in his face that might have been the beginning of an explanation. Then it was gone, replaced by the controlled expression of a man who has spent his whole career knowing when a room has turned against him and understanding that the only remaining strategy is silence. He said nothing. Lacey's hand came off Derek's arm. She took one step back, then another, until she was standing alone at the edge of the table with her champagne glass, and the particular look of a woman who is calculating rapidly which way the ground is tilting. I had been watching my son. Now I watched him reach up and touch his own face, fingertips against his jaw, a small disoriented gesture, the gesture of a man trying to locate himself. Then Frank Odell stood up at the back of the room. Frank was not a man who made speeches. In 22 years, I had heard him string together more than 4 sentences, maybe a dozen times. He stood up, and the people at the surrounding tables looked at him, and he looked at the room and then at me, and he said what he had come here to say. "Ikitais, I've worked for this man for 22 years, Frank said. His voice was rough and straight, the voice of someone who does not spend time making words smooth. I was here the morning he repaired the East Cabin foundation by himself because the crew was short. I was here the winter we lost the north heating system at 2 in the morning, and he was on the roof in -15 degrees while the guests were still asleep. I've watched him shovel this parking lot 10,000 mornings." He paused. "I've never once heard him tell anyone what he owned, not once in 22 years. He looked around the room. I just thought people in this room ought to know what kind of man they're talking about." He sat back down. The room was quiet for a moment, with a different quality than it had been quiet before. Then Hollis reached into his briefcase one final time. He produced something I recognized, a photograph 8 by 10 black and white mounted on cardstock. He set it on the table where the transfer agreement had been. It was a photograph of August Strand taken sometime in the late 70s, standing in the snow on what was clearly undeveloped land. He was holding a shovel, the same shovel I had in my truck, the same shovel I had carried into the resort every morning for 21 years. August Strand broke the first ground on this property with that shovel in 1974, Hollis said. Cormac Strand has used it every winter since his father died. This morning before driving here tonight, he used it to clear the front walk of this building. He looked at the room. I thought that was worth knowing. Mayor Patricia Dunn's hand went to her mouth. Marcus Webb had stopped writing. He was looking at the photograph. I looked at it too. My father in the snow, young and certain, holding the thing that had built everything. My throat tightened in a way I had not expected, and I pressed my lips together and waited for it to pass. Then I looked at Derek. He was looking at the photograph. His eyes were bright and red-rimmed in a way that had nothing to do with the champagne, and his hand was pressed flat against his sternum again, and I watched my son look at his grandfather in the snow with a shovel and understand for the first time, and all at once, the full weight of what he had tried to sign away tonight. His lips moved. No sound came out. "Dad," he said finally. Just the word. Nothing after it. I looked at my son for a long moment, the man of 40 standing where the boy of 8 used to be, with his hand pressed to his chest, and his eyes spilling over, and the general manager completely gone from his face. I picked up the transfer agreement from the table. I held it up so the room could see it. Then I folded it once, twice, and set it back down. "Klatsike, this document," I said, "was prepared without my knowledge and presented to me under conditions that render it legally unenforceable. My attorney has confirmed this. It will not be signed tonight or any other night." I looked at Garrett. "Your employment with Strand Mountain Holdings is terminated effective immediately. Mr. Vane has the paperwork." Garrett picked up his leather folder from the table. He tucked it under his arm. He looked at me one last time with the eyes of a man who has played a long game and lost it on the final move, and then he walked toward the ballroom door without a word. The room watched him go. The door had not fully closed behind Garrett when the sound started. It began as a low tone from the main speakers, the kind of sound a system makes when it is warming up, when audio is being fed back through the line from a recording. The man at the soundboard in the back corner of the ballroom, a 26-year-old named Eddie, who had worked for Coldwater Ridge for 3 years, and who Frank Odell had spoken to privately at 4:30 that afternoon, adjusted 2 levels and pressed play. The ballroom filled with Derek's voice. Not Derek's voice, as it was now the stripped-down, red-rimmed voice of a man who had just watched his certainty dissolve. Derek's voice from 90 minutes ago when he had been standing over me at this table with his finger on a signature line and his performance at full volume. Sign it, Dad. You've been a burden long enough. We're grown. We don't need a maintenance man following us around. A pause in the recording. Then, sign it. You're nothing but a parasite. You always have been. The playback ended. The silence that followed was the most complete silence I had heard in a room full of people in my 68 years. Not the silence of shock, the room had moved past shock. This was the silence of 80 people sitting with something that had been said out loud and could not be taken back, hearing it a second time in the same room where it was first spoken through the sound system of the building the speaker's father owned. Under Colorado's one-party consent law, any party to a conversation may record it without the knowledge of the other parties. I was a party to every conversation that took place in this room tonight. Frank had ensured the system was running before the first guest arrived. Everything was legal. Everything was documented. Eddie at the soundboard sat very still with his hands in his lap. Derek had not moved since the playback started. He stood at the edge of the table where he had been standing when it ended, his hand still pressed to his chest, his face still wet at the eyes, his mouth slightly open the way a mouth goes when the body cannot decide what expression is appropriate for what the mind is processing. When the last echo of his own voice faded from the speakers, he closed his eyes. His shoulders pulled inward and downward, and a sound came out of him. That was not a word, low and broken, the sound of a man who has just heard himself from the outside for the first time. Lacey took another step back. Owen sat down. His hands were flat on the table and his head was bowed and his jaw was working the way it does when you are trying very hard not to cry in a room full of people and not entirely succeeding. Nora lowered her phone. She looked at her brother for a long moment, not with the expression of someone who has won something, but with the expression of someone who has watched the thing they feared most happen, and found it was exactly as bad as they thought it would be. Her free hand came up and pressed against her lips. Paige made a sound that was halfway between a breath and a sob. She pressed both hands over her mouth and looked at the ceiling the way people do when they are trying to keep something in. Mayor Patricia Dunn had both hands flat on the table, and her eyes were moving between Derek and me with the expression of a woman assembling something in real time, piece by piece, that she suspected was going to stay assembled for a very long time. Marcus Webb was writing again. Steadily, without looking up the way reporters write when they know the story has already told itself, and their only job now is to get it down accurately. I stood up from my chair. I had been seated for most of the evening. I stood slowly the way I always stand, and I looked around the room at Frank Odell at his table in the back, who gave me the same small nod he had given me that morning in the parking lot when I told him about the recording system. At Vera seated straight beside Nadine Pruitt, her hands folded on the table, her eyes on me with 39 years of steadiness in them. At Owen, still bent over his folded hands. At Nora, her hand over her mouth. At Paige, her eyes wet and her chin up. At Derek. My son was looking at me. The performance was gone, the volume was gone, the borrowed certainty he had been carrying for 4 years, like a coat that belonged to someone else, all of it gone. What was left was the face underneath, older than I remembered it being, more tired. And somewhere in it, very far back, the beginning of something that looked like it might eventually become what it needed to become, if given enough time and enough honesty. I had said more words tonight than I had planned to say. I only needed one more. I walked around the table, past Hollis, who stepped back to give me room, past the folded transfer agreement on the tablecloth, past the photograph of August in the snow. I stopped when I was close enough that Derek could hear me without me needing to raise my voice. I did not raise it. I built this place so you would have somewhere to stand, I said. Not somewhere to stand above me. I held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then I turned and I took Vera's hand, where she had risen from her chair to meet me, and we walked toward the ballroom door together. Behind us, I heard Owen push back his chair. Then Nora. Then Paige. And then from somewhere at the back of the room, one pair of hands, Frank Odell, began to clap. It was slow at first, deliberate the way Frank did everything. Then another pair of hands joined it. Then another. By the time Vera and I reached the door, the sound had grown into something I did not turn around to look at because I did not need to see it. I could feel it move through the floor under my feet, through the walls of the building my father had started, and I had finished through 68 years of mornings that had started before dawn with cold air and a worn wooden handle, and the particular satisfaction of work that asks nothing of you except that you show up and do it right. I held the door for my wife. We walked out into the Telluride night together, cold and clear and very still, the mountains invisible in the dark. But there the way they were always there. The way some things are always there, whether you can see them or not. I breathed. I slept. That was the first thing, the thing I had not done properly in months. I lay down beside Vera at 11:30, and I was gone before midnight, a clean and dreamless sleep, the way sleep comes when a body has finally set something heavy down. I was up before 6. Old habit. I dressed in the dark, carried my boots downstairs, and reached for August's shovel by the back door. 8 degrees outside. A fresh inch on the ground, still and unmarked. The sky was the particular dark that has gray working into its edges, the dark that means the sun is coming, even if you cannot see it yet. I started at the top of the front walk and worked down toward the road. Push and lift and redirect. Lead it, don't push it. I had been working 20 minutes when I heard boots on snow behind me. Frank Odell was crossing the parking lot. Behind him, in a loose group, were 6 of the longest-serving crew members' men who had been with Coldwater Ridge through every season I had run it. None of them said anything. They pulled shovels from the equipment shed and spread out across the lot and began to work. That was all. That was enough. At 8 o'clock, Hollis sent the termination letter to Garrett Pruitt, breach of fiduciary duty and conflict of interest, effective immediately, company property, to be returned within 48 hours. A second letter went to Garrett's attorney outlining the civil action over the Meridian LOI. I did not read Garrett's response, if he sent one. Hollis handled it. That was what Hollis was for. Derek called at 9:15, then 9:40, then twice more before 11. I let every one of them go to voicemail. I was not ready. I kept shoveling. At 10:45, Vera called. "He sounds like himself," she said. "The version from before." I stood in the middle of the east path with the shovel handle in both hands and the cold on my face. "I'm not ready," I said. "I know," she said. I told him you were working. That evening, the 5 of us sat in the kitchen until past midnight. Vera, Owen, Nora, Paige, and me. I made a pot of chili from my mother's recipe, and we sat around the table and ate and talked and did not talk and ate some more. At some point, Paige started crying quietly, and Nora put an arm around her, and Owen refilled everyone's water without being asked. Nobody commented on any of it. We were past the part where things needed to be commented on. "Why didn't you tell us?" Owen asked. Not angry anymore, just asking. Not about the money, just why didn't you tell us who you were? "I thought I was protecting you," I said, "from what knowing changes in a person." "And now?" Nora asked. I picked up my spoon. Now I think August was smarter than me. He told me what the land was worth the day he bought it. He didn't wait until I was 40. Owen made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Yeah," he said. On Monday, Marcus Webb's story ran on the front page of the Telluride Daily Planet. The photograph he had taken at 6 in the morning, the one I had not known he was taking, showed me from behind, in my work clothes. August's shovel across my shoulder, the Coldwater Ridge main lodge lit up gold behind me in the early dark, the San Juan Mountains rising beyond it. The caption read, "He built it." Every morning he came back and worked it. Not because he had to, because that's who he is. I read it once at the kitchen table with my coffee, folded it, put it in the drawer where I kept things worth keeping. 3 months later, I had August's shovel mounted on the wall of the resort's main office, the room I had been avoiding calling mine for 21 years. Brass brackets centered where the morning light came in first. No plaque. No explanation. Frank saw it the day I put it up and nodded once. That was enough. The civil case against Garrett settled in March. I did not attend. Hollis handled it. The Meridian deal had died the night of the ballroom. I was told the Denver representative withdrew the LOI within 48 hours, citing concerns about the counterparty's authority to represent the asset. I did not need to hear more than that. 5 months after the party, on a Thursday afternoon in April, my phone rang. Derek. I was in the truck in the resort parking lot, engine running about to drive home. I let it ring twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, I picked it up. Dad. His voice was careful and quiet, stripped down to something I had not heard in 4 years. I don't know how to start this. Start anywhere, I said. A long pause. Outside the windshield, the mountains were showing the first thin green at the tree line, the color that meant winter was finally letting go. Can I come up? He said. Not to talk about the resort, not about any of it. I want to help with whatever you're working on, if that's okay. I looked at the mountains for a moment. There's a fence line on the north perimeter, I said. 2 posts need resetting before the ground thaws all the way. It's cold work. I know, he said. You'll need gloves, I said. The real kind, not the dress kind. A sound came through the phone, something between a breath and a word, something that had been waiting a long time to get out. I know, Dad, he said. I know. I kept August's shovel on the wall of my office for a reason. Not as a trophy, as a reminder that the most expensive mistake I made in 40 years was not a bad contract or a wrong hire. It was silence. I stayed quiet to protect my children, and my silence left a door open for someone who walked through it and nearly took everything my father and I had built with our bare hands. If you are holding something back from the people you love, thinking it protects them, hear this clearly. It does not always protect them. Sometimes it just leaves them standing in the dark with no map, making decisions they would never make if they could see the full picture. Do not wait the way I waited. Say the true thing before someone else uses your silence against you. I am not a man who speaks about faith often, but I believe God puts certain mornings in a person's life where you stand in the cold before dawn and understand exactly what you are. That morning with August's shovel was one of them. This is what I know worth is not what you accumulate. It is what you do before anyone is watching. These grandpastories remind us that family revenge is never the real goal. Truth spoken plainly in the right room settles what years of silence could not. Every revenge story you have ever loved is a story about someone who refused to disappear. Every grandpastory's channel exists because these lessons are worth passing down. And every family revenge that plays out in real life usually traces back to one person who simply stopped being honest too soon. Remember that. Every revenge story starts the same way, with a silence that should have been a conversation. If this reached you, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. A gentle note before you go: some stories on this channel include fictional elements crafted to explore real human truths. If that is not what you are here for, no hard feelings, find the content that speaks to you. But if you are still with me, I will see you in the next one.